Hey there, welcome to Mr. Cozy Bedtime True Crime Stories. Tonight, we're diving into 3 hours of gripping true crime cases. Real stories of mystery, betrayal, and cold-blooded crimes, all set against the soothing backdrop of rain. It's the perfect blend of calm and unsettling. If these cases draw you in, tap that like button, share with your fellow true crime lovers, and subscribe to join our curious community. I'm always wondering, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. Now settle in, and let's dig into the darkness. Story 1. Sierra Nicole Locklear was born on January 10, 1991 in Georgia, where red clay earth meets pine forests and small towns hold tight to family traditions. She grew up dreaming of Atlanta, of practicing law in the gleaming towers of Georgia's capital city, of building a career that would make her parents proud. Her mother Kelly remembered her daughter as a fighter from the beginning, someone who had overcome health challenges in her youth and emerged stronger, more determined. Sierra decided early that she would become a lawyer, and once she set her mind to something, nothing could deter her from that path. She moved to Tennessee for her undergraduate studies, then continued to Florida State University for law school, where she specialized in insurance defense. By her early 30s, Sierra had achieved what she set out to do. She was a licensed attorney working for Gordon Rees Scully Mansukhani, an AmLaw 100 firm with more than 1,800 lawyers practicing across all 50 states. She was a devoted aunt to her niece and nephew, taking them shopping for Christmas presents and back-to-school supplies, always present for the people she loved. Sierra maintained an exceptionally close relationship with her parents, particularly her father Nick. They would talk for hours each day, sometimes 5 or 6 hours, discussing their lives, their days, their thoughts about everything and nothing. Her mother Kelly described Sierra as happy, energetic, and loving, someone who brought light into the lives of everyone around her. Her father Nick said she was very outgoing, loved sports and movies, and was really fun to be around. That was the Sierra her family knew and loved. But Nick added something else to that description, something that would prove to be a terrible foreshadowing. And she was really fun, until about a year ago. That was when Sierra met Xavier Breland. The exact circumstances of how Sierra and Xavier met remain unclear, with some reports suggesting they connected on the dating app Tinder, while others claim Sierra was representing Xavier on some legal matters. What is certain is that they met during the pandemic year of 2020, and their romance developed quickly, intensely, with the kind of passion that can sometimes blind people to warning signs they might otherwise notice. She was bubbling over with love, Kelly remembered. They were inseparable. Nick, who had always been protective of his daughter when it came to the men she dated, initially felt that Xavier treated Sierra like a queen. The relationship moved at a breathtaking pace, as whirlwind romances often do, each milestone rushing toward the next without pause for reflection. But Xavier Breland came with a complicated past. He had been married before, and had at least one child from previous relationships, including a daughter. In 2005, he had been convicted of felony burglary charges. Court records indicated he had previous warrants associated with harassing phone calls and violating a family violence order. In 2007, he had been arrested in Florida and extradited to Indiana on a fugitive warrant. These were significant red flags, patterns of behavior that suggested Xavier had difficulty respecting boundaries and following the law. Sierra's cousin Shelby Campbell later revealed that there had been problems in the relationship from the very beginning, problems that Sierra had confided to her in private messages. Early in their dating relationship, something had happened that scared Sierra enough to call things off. She had been hanging out with a male friend at her apartment when Xavier showed up uninvited and sat outside, watching. He began sending her threatening texts about spending time with another man. It was controlling behavior, possessive behavior, the kind of jealousy that crosses the line into something dangerous. Despite these warning signs, Sierra became pregnant in April 2021. Shortly after learning about the pregnancy, she and Xavier were married by a justice of the peace via Zoom. The couple relocated to Carmel, Indiana, where Xavier's father lived, and Sierra secured a position at the Indianapolis office of Gordon Rees. Their son Jackson was born in October 2021. By the time Jackson arrived, Sierra's family could see that something was terribly wrong. The vibrant, energetic woman they knew had changed. She looked haggard, run down, afraid. When Sierra and Xavier visited her parents for Christmas in December 2021, they both appeared exhausted and told a bizarre story that immediately alarmed the family. Xavier claimed that people were chasing them, specifically that his ex-wife's new husband was somehow connected to a drug cartel and was trying to harm them. He said they had been hiding in hotels to stay safe. The story made no logical sense, but Sierra seemed to believe it, or at least Xavier had convinced her to believe it. She feared for her life. She lost weight, Kelly said. "This is not Sierra. This is not my daughter." Kelly believed that Xavier was manipulating Sierra, keeping her in a paranoid and afraid state for his own purposes. A classic tactic of abusive partners who use fear to maintain control. Sarah, Sierra's sister, even contacted the FBI about the cartel story, desperate to protect her sister. The authorities investigated and determined there was no validity to Xavier's claims. It had all been a lie, a fiction designed to isolate Sierra and make her dependent on Xavier for protection from a threat that didn't exist. Shelby Campbell knew that the situation was even worse than it appeared. Sierra had sent her photographs of injuries she had sustained during physical altercations with Xavier, saving them in case they were needed for future court proceedings. Sierra had also told Shelby that Xavier had choked her on 2 separate occasions until she saw the lights go out, until she thought she was dying. The texts between Sierra and Shelby revealed a woman who was trapped and terrified, who knew she needed to leave but couldn't see a safe way out. She did call the police multiple times, Shelby revealed. The police were called to her residence both in Georgia and Indiana multiple times. But by the time officers would arrive, Sierra would have calmed down enough that she would lie for Xavier, protecting him despite what he had done to her. It's a pattern seen countless times in domestic violence cases, where victims feel compelled to protect their abusers out of fear, love, or a combination of both. Sierra confided to Shelby that she couldn't leave Xavier because she couldn't imagine letting their infant son Jackson go with Xavier for visitation. The thought of her baby being alone with a man who had hurt her so badly was unbearable. So she stayed, trapped between her fear of Xavier and her fear of what might happen to Jackson if she left. But Sierra was also planning. She had opened a secret bank account and was slowly saving money, preparing for the day when she could finally escape. She sent Shelby a text message that showed her determination. "I'm done. I'm leaving. I don't want this anymore." She told her parents that she wanted to move back to Georgia, that she would tell Xavier they were visiting family, but she would never return to Indiana. "I encouraged her and her father encouraged her to come home," Kelly said. "We just wanted her to be out of the situation, but Sierra was 31 years old. I trusted her to know what to do." In mid-February 2022, Xavier and Sierra packed up their white Volkswagen Tiguan with their 5-month-old son Jackson and their golden doodle Baker, and they began the 8.5-hour drive from Carmel, Indiana to Georgia. They arrived at Sierra's parents' home on Saturday, February 19, 2022. "She came Saturday night and stayed till Sunday," Nick told Dateline. The visit was brief, just one night, before the family moved on to visit Xavier's mother in Johns Creek, Georgia, about an hour's drive away. On Monday, February 21st, at 11:17 p.m., Sierra texted her father, saying she would be back in the morning if that was okay. Nick responded immediately, "Of course it's okay, you don't have to ask." But Sierra never came back that morning. On Wednesday, February 23rd, 2022, surveillance cameras captured the last confirmed sighting of Sierra Breland. At 7:17 p.m., she was standing in the doorway of Xavier's mother's home on Highgate Manor Court in the Parsons Walk subdivision of Johns Creek. The footage showed her accepting a delivery, a mundane moment that would become the last verified evidence that Sierra was alive. Nick texted Sierra that evening. She responded saying she was okay, but feeling a little sick. He reached out again later that night asking how she was feeling. This time, there was no response. He texted again on Thursday, February 24th. Again, silence. By Friday, February 25th, 2022, Sierra's parents were becoming genuinely concerned. It was completely out of character for their daughter not to respond to their messages, especially given how close they were, how frequently they communicated. On Saturday morning, February 26th, 2022, Nick's phone rang from an unknown Indiana number. I didn't automatically panic because I thought they were still in Georgia, Nick later told Dateline. So I answered it, and they said it was the police. And that's when they told me she was missing. Xavier Breland had reported Sierra missing from their home in Carmel, Indiana. He claimed that they had returned there together after visiting his mother in Johns Creek. But surveillance footage told a different story. Cameras captured Xavier at gas stations on the drive back to Indiana, going into stores, purchasing items, getting back in the vehicle. At no point in any of that footage were Sierra, baby Jackson, or their dog Baker visible. Xavier told the Carmel Police Department that he and Sierra had argued on the night of February 25th. He claimed she had run out of her Adderall medication and asked for some of his. He said he refused, which made her angry, and she stormed out of the house around 10 p.m. or 11 p.m., wearing a black top and purple shorts. He suggested she might have been walking to a nearby CVS pharmacy. The story was absurd on its face. The temperature that night was 20 degrees Fahrenheit, well below freezing. Sierra had allegedly left without her 3 cell phones, her personal phone, her work phone, and a burner phone that family members said she kept specifically for emergency communication. She had left without her identification, without her credit cards, without her car keys. Most importantly, she had left without her 5-month-old son Jackson, and without Baker, her beloved dog. No one believed Xavier's story that she walked off without her phone, her keys, her baby or her dog, Shelby said. It was 20 degrees out. It is beyond believability. Nick called Xavier directly, trying to get answers, trying to understand what had happened to his daughter. I got nowhere, Nick said. He then called Xavier's father, who lived next door to the couple in Carmel. The response was chilling in its simplicity. He said, "No. I never saw her," Nick recalled. Xavier's father had never seen Sierra return to Indiana at all. Police checked the CVS Xavier claimed Sierra might have walked to. She had never arrived. No surveillance footage captured her entering the store or walking anywhere near it. Family members were informed that there was no evidence Sierra had ever been in Indiana on February 25th or 26th. As investigators from both the Carmel Police Department in Indiana and the Johns Creek Police Department in Georgia began working together, they determined that the last confirmed sighting of Sierra was at 7:17 p.m. on February 24th, 2022, at Xavier's mother's home in Johns Creek. Whatever had happened to Sierra had happened in Georgia, not in Indiana as Xavier claimed. A search warrant was executed at the Highgate Manor Court residence. Forensic experts and cadaver dogs searched the property, looking for blood stains, signs of a struggle, any clues that might reveal what had happened during the couple's stay. Evidence was collected, though investigators did not disclose publicly what they had found. The cadaver dogs did not pick up a strong scent trail at the residence, which complicated the investigation. Investigators also examined the white Volkswagen Tiguan that Xavier claimed he and Sierra had both traveled in back to Indiana. Cadaver dogs were brought in to sniff the vehicle. The results were telling. Those dogs which are very good weren't picking up any scent, nothing, Nick said. If she rode up there 10 hours in that car, the dogs would have known it. The evidence strongly suggested that Sierra had never been in that vehicle on the return trip to Indiana, that Xavier had driven back alone. On February 28, 2022, just 2 days after reporting Sierra missing, Xavier was involved in an incident at his Carmel home involving a firearm. Court documents described it as an accidental discharge of a firearm. Xavier told investigators he was moving a Christmas tree in the garage when he heard a gunshot and ran outside. He said he then returned to the garage, located the gun, and unloaded it. Investigators found a SIG Sauer P365 and another firearm at the scene. During the officers' visit to the home regarding the firearms incident, Xavier handed them a missing persons flyer for his wife. The timing was suspicious, the circumstances bizarre. Just 2 days after reporting that his wife had walked away into the freezing night, Xavier was involved in an unexplained shooting incident at their home. On March 2, 2022, the Carmel Police Department and the Johns Creek Police Department issued a joint press release announcing that Xavier Breland Jr., age 37, had been identified as a person of interest in Sierra's disappearance. The statement clarified that Xavier had not been criminally charged in relation to Sierra's case, but that he had been arrested on an unrelated warrant out of Georgia. That warrant was for aggravated stalking charges in Coweta County, Georgia. Court records revealed that Xavier had allegedly placed a GPS tracker inside a stuffed animal belonging to his daughter, with the intention of monitoring the location of the child's mother, Xavier's ex-wife. The case had stemmed from a custody dispute between the former couple. Xavier was considered a flight risk on the stalking charge because he had previously missed court dates and fled the country. He was extradited to Georgia to face those charges. As the investigation continued, Xavier's accounts of what happened to Sierra kept changing. In March 2022, investigators obtained jailhouse video footage that showed Xavier talking to his children about Sierra's disappearance. In the video, Xavier told his kids that Sierra would not be coming home because someone had kidnapped her. This narrative directly contradicted what he had told the Carmel police, that she had walked away from their home on her own. Xavier's own father acknowledged the inconsistencies in his son's statements. He just creates a different story for everybody he's talking to, Xavier's father admitted. To the police, Sierra had walked away. To his children, she had been kidnapped. To anyone who would listen, Xavier told a version of events that suited his needs in that moment, with no concern for how the stories contradicted each other. The FBI and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation joined the search for Sierra. On March 11, 2022, family members, friends, volunteers, and officers conducted a large search effort in Johns Creek, distributing flyers and searching neighborhoods along Medlock Bridge Road, where investigators believed Sierra may have traveled. Digital message signs were placed throughout the area asking for the public's help. Despite the extensive efforts, Sierra remained missing. In August 2022, Xavier went to trial in Georgia on the aggravated stalking charges related to tracking his ex-wife. On August 16, 2022, a jury acquitted him of those charges, and he was released from custody. However, his freedom was short-lived. The following day, he was arrested on a new warrant. Xavier Breland was eventually charged with unlawful possession of a firearm by a serious violent felon in connection with the February 28, 2022, shooting incident at his Carmel home. Because of his 2005 felony burglary conviction in Marion County, Xavier was prohibited from possessing firearms. The trial for this charge was delayed multiple times over the next 2 years. In June 2024, while Xavier's firearm trial was ongoing, he was charged with intimidation. According to court documents and witness testimony, Xavier had made a threatening statement to Blair Duncan, an advocate for Sierra's family who had been attending the trial. As Duncan was exiting the courtroom, Xavier made direct eye contact with her, then turned away and said, "You better hope you see me before I see you." When Duncan walked past him to leave, she noticed that Xavier had seen the lock screen photo on her phone, which showed a child. Xavier commented, "Cute kid, but not in a kind way." "No, it was in a threatening way for sure." "Absolutely," Duncan later said. "I'm really over the audacity that it takes for him to think that he can speak to anyone any way that he wants and to think that he's above the law. And I'm really glad to see some justice and really happy to be a part of that justice." Courthouse security cameras had captured the interaction. On June 11, 2024, more than 2 years after Sierra's disappearance, Xavier Breland Jr. was found guilty of unlawful possession of a firearm by a serious violent felon. In July 2024, He was sentenced to 12 years in the Indiana Department of Correction. Xavier is currently incarcerated at a facility in Pendleton, Indiana, and is appealing his sentence. Sierra Breland has now been missing for more than 3 years. She was 31 years old when she vanished, standing just 5 feet tall and weighing approximately 120 pounds, with blonde hair and a bright smile that her family will never forget. Sierra's parents, Nick and Kelly Locklear, have been granted custody of Jackson, the grandson they are now raising without his mother. Kelly often reflects on the signs they missed, the warnings they didn't fully understand until it was too late. "We should have seen the signs," she said. "Lots of things go through your mind when your child is missing, and you have thoughts that a specific person is responsible," Kelly added. The family believes with absolute certainty that Xavier knows what happened to Sierra, that he is the only person who can provide the answers they desperately need. "Losing someone, not knowing how or why, is the absolute worst feeling," said Sierra's Aunt Jeannie Bush. "I can't describe it. None of us can move forward, and there's just this constant pain and heaviness of not knowing." Kelly described her daughter's devotion to baby Jackson in heartbreaking terms. "There is no one since the baby has been born. No one has ever kept that baby for her, like, not even for an hour," Kelly said. "She was the sole mother, caregiver, everything to that child. The idea that Sierra would walk away from her infant son, that she would abandon Jackson without her phone, her money, or any means of caring for him, is inconceivable to everyone who knew her. For them to say she just said, 'Hey, to heck with it, walking out the door without my child, my car, my phone, my money, nothing, and I'm just gonna hit the road,' is absurd," Kelly said. Lieutenant Eric Rogier of the Johns Creek Police Department confirmed in March 2025 that the investigation remains active, though he has no new updates or investigative leads to share with the public. Xavier Breland Jr. remains the sole person of interest in Sierra's disappearance. "It's important to keep this story alive because information from the public is often a way for cold cases to break," Lieutenant Rogier said. "It's important not to forget Sierra Breland's tragic disappearance. I have faith that the truth will come to light at some point. That will be a great day, and we want nothing more than to bring justice to Sierra and provide closure for her family." The FBI has announced a $10,000 reward for information leading to Sierra's whereabouts. Investigators continue to hope that someone who saw the white Volkswagen Tiguan with Georgia license plate 5,869 renminbi and an FSU law school frame around the plate will come forward with information about the time between when Sierra was last seen on February 24, 2022, and when Xavier reported her missing on February 26. Sierra Breland had overcome so much to build the life she wanted. She had worked her way through undergraduate school and law school, had earned her law license, had landed a position at a prestigious national firm. She had become the lawyer she always dreamed of being. She was a devoted aunt, a loving daughter who spoke to her parents for hours every day, a new mother who was fiercely protective of her infant son. But she had also become trapped in a relationship with a man who controlled her through fear and violence, who isolated her from her support system, who told elaborate lies to keep her dependent on him. She had tried to leave. She had saved money in secret. She had made plans to return to Georgia and never go back to Indiana. She had confided in her cousin that she was done, that she was leaving. Somewhere between 7:17 p.m. on February 24, 2022, when surveillance cameras captured her at her mother-in-law's door in Johns Creek, and February 26, 2022, when Xavier reported her missing from Indiana, Sierra Breland disappeared. Her body has never been found. No evidence has emerged to suggest she is alive somewhere, starting over, building a new life. Xavier Breland sits in an Indiana prison, serving 12 years for illegal possession of a firearm, maintaining his innocence regarding his wife's disappearance despite the mountain of inconsistencies and lies that surround his story. He told police Sierra walked away. He told his children she was kidnapped. He told his father different stories than he told investigators. He drove back to Indiana alone, despite claiming Sierra had traveled with him. And somewhere in Georgia, or perhaps somewhere along the route between Johns Creek and Carmel, Sierra Breland rests in a location known only to the person who put her there. Her parents wait for answers that may never come. Her son Jackson grows up without his mother, cared for by grandparents who grieve every day for the daughter they've lost and the grandson who will never know her. Loving woman who deserved so much better than the fate she received. And investigators in Johns Creek continue to hope that someone, somewhere, knows something that will finally bring Sierra home and allow her family to lay her to rest with the dignity and love she deserves. Story 2. In May 2023, Clayton Eckhard, a former contestant on Season 18 of The Bachelorette and the lead of Season 26 of The Bachelor, had settled back into life in Arizona after his time in the spotlight. He had transitioned from reality television to a career in real estate, announcing publicly on Instagram in April that he was working as an agent in the Phoenix and Scottsdale areas. His days were filled with showing properties, working with clients, and building a new chapter of his life away from the cameras and roses that had defined his previous year. On May 17, 2023, Clayton received a message through LinkedIn from a woman named Laura Michelle Owens. She was inquiring about real estate properties, and what began as a professional conversation quickly turned flirtatious. 3 days later, on May 20th, Clayton invited Laura to his home. Both consumed gummies, and they engaged in a non-penetrative sexual encounter. Laura would later claim something entirely different, alleging that Clayton had raped her, though she never pressed charges, and her account of that evening would change multiple times over the coming months. The following day, while viewing properties together, Clayton told Laura that their hookup had been a mistake and that he wanted to keep their relationship strictly professional. Laura began crying uncontrollably. She wanted more than a professional relationship, wanted him to give her a chance romantically, or at the very least to remain her real estate agent. But Clayton felt uncomfortable with her emotional reaction and her behavior. He decided he could not work with her and transferred her to another agent. Laura didn't accept this rejection. She contacted Clayton incessantly over the following days, prompting him to threaten to call the police and block her number. But on May 30th, 2023, just 10 days after their encounter, Laura sent Clayton a photo that would change both of their lives, a positive pregnancy test. She claimed she was pregnant with twins. What followed was a months-long ordeal in which Laura Owens presented pregnancy test after pregnancy test, all showing positive results. On June 1st, she visited Banner Urgent Care in Scottsdale and produced a positive HCG test, which she sent to Clayton. When Clayton agreed to meet with her on June 17th and asked her to take another HCG test, that result was also positive. The test seemed to confirm what Laura was claiming. She was pregnant with Clayton's children. But Clayton and those close to him began to suspect something wasn't right. When confronted with evidence that anti-seizure medication, which Laura was taking, could cause false positive pregnancy tests, Laura disagreed and dismissed the concern. On June 28th, Laura sent Clayton an email with the subject line, "Having the baby if I don't hear back tonight." In the message, she told him that having intercourse with her was the safest thing he could do, because she was already pregnant with his child. She stated she would only consider an abortion if he agreed to give their relationship a chance. 3 days later, on July 1st, Laura sent another email entitled "The Final Opportunity to Consider Abortion," attaching a Dropbox link labeled "Pregnancy Evidence." On July 2nd, she emailed Clayton's parents, inviting them to attend an ultrasound appointment with her. In a later affidavit, Laura would claim she visited Planned Parenthood in Mission Viejo with her mother on that date. But when Clayton's legal counsel contacted Planned Parenthood, they confirmed that while Laura had scheduled an appointment for July 2nd, she had canceled it. During testimony at trial, Laura changed her story entirely, claiming instead that she had gone to a different Planned Parenthood location in Los Angeles that day. But investigators discovered that all Planned Parenthood locations in Los Angeles are closed on Sundays, making her claim impossible. On July 10th, Laura sent Clayton a photo of what she claimed was her ultrasound from Planned Parenthood showing twins. But between July 19th and 23rd, Laura was competing in multiple equestrian events at the Blenheim Summer Festival, riding her horse Sirocco 91 in physically demanding competitions. For someone who claimed to be pregnant with twins and experiencing complications, her athletic performance seemed inconsistent with her medical claims. Then, on July 23, 2023, Laura reported through her attorney David Gingras that she had passed 2 less than hand-sized fetal sacs and had miscarried the twins. She claimed she consulted a telehealth doctor who advised her that an in-person visit was unnecessary. Laura also claimed she had texted photos of the fetal sacs to her sister Sarah and her doctor. But in later legal filings, Laura admitted that both she and her sister had deleted these images and declined to provide any evidence of them during the discovery process. No medical records, no photographs, no physical evidence of the alleged miscarriage was ever produced. In August 2023, Laura Owens filed a paternity lawsuit against Clayton Eckhart in Maricopa County, Arizona, seeking child support for the twins she claimed to have lost. Clayton maintained his innocence, insisting that penetrative intercourse had never occurred, and therefore he could not be the father of any children. In September, Clayton underwent a paternity test. The results revealed little to no fetal DNA, casting serious doubt on Laura's claims. By October 2023, both parties had obtained orders of protection against each other. On October 6th, the same day that Clayton publicly announced that DNA testing had proved he was not the father of Laura's alleged twins, Laura filed for an order of protection against him. In December, Laura claimed she had miscarried and requested dismissal of the paternity case. But Judge Julie Mata wasn't ready to simply dismiss the case. Too many inconsistencies had emerged. Too many questions remained unanswered. In February 2024, at a status conference, Laura asserted she had lost the pregnancy in September or October of the previous year, though she had initially claimed the miscarriage occurred in July. The judge ordered an evidentiary hearing to examine all the evidence and testimony, setting the trial date for June 10, 2024. As the case progressed through discovery, Clayton's attorney Greg Woodnick began uncovering evidence that Laura had fabricated much of her pregnancy claim. Laura signed HIPAA releases to acquire her medical records dating back to August 2020. When those records were examined alongside the ultrasound images and documents Laura had submitted to the court, forensic experts determined that Laura had altered an ultrasound image, fabricated a pregnancy video, and lied multiple times about her medical appointments and test results. On March 1, 2024, Laura sat for a deposition. During that deposition, she admitted to altering and fabricating ultrasounds and sonograms. Her attorney David Gingras later unsuccessfully attempted to have those admissions removed from evidence. The evidentiary hearing on June 10, 2024, lasted an entire day. Laura Owens took the stand and testified under oath about her alleged pregnancy, her medical appointments, and the evidence she had submitted. But under cross-examination by Clayton's attorneys, her testimony fell apart. Laura committed perjury multiple times during her testimony, contradicting her own previous statements and the documentary evidence that had been gathered. She accused Clayton of rape, a claim that was not substantiated by any evidence, and that she had never reported to police at the time it allegedly occurred. She changed key details of her story, including the location and timing of medical appointments, unable to keep track of the elaborate fiction she had constructed over the previous year. Medical experts testified for both sides. Dr. Michael Medchill and Dr. Deans examined the evidence Laura had presented and the medical records that had been obtained through HIPAA releases. Their testimony made clear that the ultrasound images Laura had submitted were not authentic, that the dates and information had been altered, and that no credible medical evidence existed to support Laura's claim that she had ever been pregnant with Clayton's children. Clayton took the stand and calmly maintained his position. No penetrative intercourse had occurred. He could not be the father of children Laura claimed she had been carrying, and he had been the victim of an elaborate fraud designed to extort money from him and force him into a relationship with Laura. On June 18, 2024, Judge Julie Mata issued her ruling. It was devastating for Laura Owens and vindication for Clayton Echard. Judge Mata stated that the court could not find that Laura Owens was ever pregnant with Clayton Echard's children and could not establish paternity of a non-confirmed pregnancy. The judge found that Laura had filed the case in bad faith, that it was not grounded in fact or based in law, and that Laura had provided false testimony. Judge Mata went further, noting that Laura Owens had acted unreasonably in the litigation, initiating said litigation without basis or merit. The judge found that Laura had committed perjury while under oath and had knowingly presented a false claim. Most significantly, Judge Mata determined that Laura Owens demonstrated a pattern of similar, if not identical behavior in past relationships, referencing two other men, Michael Maracchini and Greg Gillespie, who had also been victims of Laura's false pregnancy claims. Judge Mata granted Clayton's petition for non-paternity, ordered Laura to pay Clayton's attorney fees totaling $149,219.76, and referred Laura Owens to the Maricopa County Attorney Rachel Mitchell for potential criminal charges of fraud and falsifying medical records, both Class 4 felonies. As the case against Laura Owens was being built, investigators from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office began looking into Laura's past. What they discovered was chilling. Clayton Echard was not Laura's first victim. He wasn't even her second or third. Laura Michelle Owens, they learned, had been running variations of the same scheme for nearly a decade, targeting men who rejected her romantic advances and using false pregnancy claims to manipulate, control, and extort them. In 2014, Laura had been involved with an unnamed man in San Francisco. After that relationship ended, Laura filed a paternity case against him claiming she was pregnant. She later withdrew the case. No verified medical records were ever provided to support her claims. In 2018, Laura had dated Michael Maracchini. After just 3 dates, Michael decided he didn't want to continue the relationship. Laura claimed she was pregnant with his child. She told Michael she was considering an abortion, creating emotional turmoil, and using the alleged pregnancy to try to maintain control over him. In July of that year, Laura and her mother claimed that Laura had an abortion, though no medical records were ever produced. By November or December 2018, Michael had learned that Laura had faked the pregnancy entirely. Distraught, he called his sister asking for help to mediate a conversation with Laura, who was threatening suicide. On January 8, 2018, Laura encountered Michael and his sister outside a restaurant and began screaming obscenities at Michael because she was upset that he had started dating someone new. That evening, Michael called the San Francisco Police Department to file a report against Laura, and officers recommended he file a restraining order. But before Michael could file his restraining order, Laura filed one against him. On January 10, 2018, she was granted a temporary restraining order, which was later renewed in September 2020 for 5 years. In her declarations to obtain that order, Laura painted herself as the victim of Michael's abuse. She later gave a TEDx talk entitled "The Life-Saving Power of Kindness to Strangers," in which she described escaping an abusive relationship with Michael, claiming a stranger on a plane had saved her life through a simple act of kindness. The talk was also published in Chicken Soup for the Soul, but was later removed from the publication after Chicken Soup developed serious doubts about the story's authenticity. Michael Maracchini has maintained the restraining order against him is based on lies. In an interview, he stated that the order has made it difficult for him to gain employment because it appears on background checks, severely damaging his career prospects. In May 2025, a forensic investigator examined Michael's laptop and verified that the text messages he had saved from Laura were authentic, proving she had indeed sent him messages about being pregnant and considering an abortion. In 2021, Laura connected on Bumble with Greg Gillespie. They met for drinks on 2 consecutive evenings, June 30th and July 1st. On their second meeting, they engaged in sexual intercourse while using 2 forms of birth control. The following evening, July 2nd, Laura attended a group dinner uninvited, where Greg observed troubling behaviors that made him decide he no longer wanted to pursue a relationship with her. But on July 16, 2021, just 16 days after their sexual encounter, Laura texted Greg claiming she was pregnant with his child after an alleged positive HCG test at One Medical. On July 28, Laura claimed via phone conversation that she had administered the first abortion pill vaginally. By August, Laura's communications escalated. She sent Greg an email chain allegedly involving attorneys, including Joe Cotchett, a family friend of the Owens family, and Allison Cordova, an employee at Cotchett's law firm. The email included a signed contingency fee agreement for legal representation. Greg hired attorney Greg Woodnick to represent him. Woodnick asked Laura to agree to a prenatal paternity test. Laura agreed, but mentioned she was planning to file a separate family court case. In November 2021, Laura filed for an order of protection against Greg, but only after he had attempted 3 times to have her served with legal papers in August, exactly 3 months prior. On March 4, 2022, Laura falsely claimed to have been drugged and sexually assaulted, blaming both Greg Gillespie and his attorney Greg Woodnick for playing a part. This accusation came just hours after Greg Woodnick had obtained the complete 221-page restraining order documents between Laura and Michael Maricini, revealing Laura's pattern of false accusations. On January 29, 2025, at 6 o'clock in the morning, the Scottsdale Police Department Special Assignments Unit executed a search warrant at the residence where Laura Michelle Owens lived with her elderly parents, Ron Owens and Jan Black. The warrant, signed by Judge Tara Prochko, authorized a search of the property for evidence related to allegations of perjury, tampering with evidence, and theft by extortion. Laura was residing in a detached casita behind her parents' main house. When detectives arrived and began clearing the main structure, they heard over the radio that Laura was inside the casita and refusing to exit. According to multiple detectives' reports, Laura argued with officers through a sliding glass door, stated she was calling her lawyer, then shut and locked the door. She reportedly claimed the officers were not real police, complained about the early hour, and alleged she was being assaulted, though multiple detectives documented that no force was used against her. Eventually, after calling her attorney, Laura complied and exited the casita at approximately 6:55 a.m. On May 6, 2025, a Maricopa County grand jury indicted Laura Michelle Owens on 7 felony counts related to her false pregnancy claim against Clayton Eckhard, 1 count of fraudulent schemes and artifices, a Class 2 felony, 1 count of forgery, a Class 4 felony, for counts of perjury, Class 4 felonies, and 1 count of tampering with physical evidence, a Class 6 felony. The following day, Laura released a public statement denying the allegations and claiming the charges resulted from a coordinated harassment campaign and public pressure from a group calling itself Justice for Clayton. She stated she had never been charged with a crime before, asserted that she had lab-confirmed positive pregnancy tests, and criticized the Maricopa County Attorney's Office for failing to provide disability-related accommodations for her recently claimed autism diagnosis. On May 29, 2025, Laura appeared for her arraignment hearing and pleaded not guilty to all charges. Judge granted her release on her own recognizance. A pre-trial hearing was set for July 11, 2025, and trial for October 23, 2025. But the Maricopa County Attorney's Office wasn't finished. On November 6, 2025, County Attorney Rachel Mitchell announced an additional indictment against Laura Michelle Owens on felony charges related to a false claim of pregnancy involving a second victim, Greg Gillespie. Investigators had found evidence that Laura had falsified documents to support her pregnancy claim against Greg after he declined to continue dating her following their third date. The new indictment included 7 additional felony charges: 1 count of perjury, Class 4 felony, 1 count of fraudulent schemes and artifices, Class 2 felony, 2 counts of taking the identity of another, Class 4 felonies, 2 counts of forgery, Class 4 felonies, and 1 count of theft by extortion accused of crime, Class 4 felony. These charges were in addition to those involving Clayton Eckhard, bringing Laura's total felony counts to 14. Laura Michelle Owens was born on May 14, 1990, to Ron Owens and Jan Black, both longtime San Francisco broadcasters. Her father had spent more than 40 years at KGO Radio and was inducted into the Bay Area Radio Hall of Fame in 2007. Her mother built a career in radio, journalism, and podcast production. Despite her parents' respected public careers, Laura's own public profile has become defined by a series of legal controversies involving fabricated pregnancy claims and allegations from multiple victims. Laura has maintained an active presence in the equestrian community, competing nationally in United States Equestrian Federation equitation events on her horse Sirocco 91. She co-hosts a self-help podcast called Nobody Told Me with her mother and is co-owner and manager of Quartet Farms LLC, where she trains and sells what she calls investment ponies. She is also an aspiring real estate investor and co-founder of the real estate company Keybacker LLC, alongside her sister Sarah Navarro. But behind this veneer of accomplishment and normalcy lies a pattern of behavior that has destroyed lives and reputations. Michael Maracchini struggles to find employment because a restraining order based on false allegations appears on his background checks. Greg Gillespie has spent years and substantial money defending himself against Laura's false claims and lawsuits. Clayton Eckhard has been dragged through a very public legal battle, his reputation questioned, forced to spend nearly $150,000 in legal fees to prove his innocence. Laura's parents, Ron and Jan, have also faced consequences. In June 2025, J.P. Morgan Chase Bank filed a complaint against them for breach of contract, seeking a principal award of $51,861.07. Around the same time, Ron and Jan filed for Chapter 13 bankruptcy protection, listing approximately 46 creditors, including their own eldest daughter Sarah and son-in-law Christian Navarro. In December 2024, Ron posted a GoFundMe link to his Facebook profile, asking his longtime supporters for money for medical bills, mentioning alleged cancer treatments and Parkinson's disease. Many believe the money raised is being used to pay Laura's legal bills. As of February 2026, Laura Michelle Owens faces trial on 14 felony counts across 2 separate indictments. If convicted on all charges, she could face decades in prison for her schemes to defraud and extort multiple men through false pregnancy claims. The case has attracted national attention, not just because one of the victims was a reality television star, but because it represents something larger and more troubling: the weaponization of pregnancy claims and the legal system itself to manipulate, control, and punish men who simply wanted to end relationships. Laura Owens has been accused of using orders of protection, paternity lawsuits, police reports, and media appearances to create false narratives in which she is always the victim and the men who reject her are always the abusers. Judge Julie Mata's ruling in the Clayton Eckhard case was unequivocal. Laura Owens had fabricated evidence, committed perjury, and filed a lawsuit in bad faith. The judge's referral for criminal prosecution was not a suggestion, but a recognition that what Laura had done crossed the line from civil dispute into criminal conduct. The victims in this case are not just the men Laura targeted with her schemes. They include Laura's own family members, who have seen their names and reputations damaged by association. They include the attorneys Laura has hired and then filed bar complaints against when they refused to continue representing her in what they recognized as fraudulent claims. They include the content creators and journalists who have been threatened with lawsuits and police reports simply for covering the case and examining the publicly available evidence. As Laura Owens awaits trial, the legal system she has manipulated for so long will finally hold her accountable. The trials scheduled for January and October 2026 will determine whether she spends years in prison for her crimes or somehow manages to escape the consequences of a decade-long pattern of lies, manipulation, and fraud. But regardless of the outcome, the damage has been done. Lives have been disrupted, reputations have been tarnished, and the trust that should exist between romantic partners has been poisoned by Laura's calculated deceptions. For Clayton Eckhard, Michael Maracchini, Greg Gillespie, and the other victims whose names may never be publicly known, the Laura Owens case serves as a painful reminder that sometimes the greatest danger comes not from strangers, but from someone who smiles, claims to care, and then uses the legal system as a weapon when their affections are not returned. Story 3. In the spring of 2013, Nancy Latham was living the kind of life that many people aspired to but few achieved. She was a successful real estate agent in Charleston, South Carolina, moving elegant historic homes in one of America's most beautiful cities. She served as a trusted member of the South Carolina Lottery Commission, a position of civic responsibility that reflected her standing in the community. She and her husband Chris Latham, the highest-paid banker in Charleston, had been married for 24 years and shared 2 daughters, Emily and Madison. From the outside, the Lathams appeared to be members of Charleston's elite, the kind of couple who attended charity galas, belonged to the right clubs, and lived in the historic neighborhoods that define the city's genteel southern charm. But behind the facade of success and social prominence, the Latham marriage had been crumbling for years, corroded by infidelity and resentment that had finally reached a breaking point. By early 2013, Nancy and Chris were in the midst of a bitter divorce. Nancy had filed for divorce after discovering that Chris had been having multiple affairs with women he worked with at Bank of America. The discovery had shattered whatever remained of their marriage, and Nancy was determined to leave with her dignity and financial security intact. Chris, on the other hand, had responded by filing for a protective order against Nancy, claiming she wanted to harm him, an accusation Nancy found both absurd and insulting. In April 2013, the former couple was just days away from a contentious court hearing that would determine the terms of their divorce, including the crucial question of alimony. Chris, who earned a 6-figure salary as a Bank of America executive, stood to lose a significant portion of his wealth if the court ruled in Nancy's favor. The stakes were high, the animosity intense, and the legal battle consuming. Nancy had no way of knowing that the court hearing would never take place, because someone had been hired to ensure she would never make it there alive. On April 5, 2013, Charleston Police Officer Daniel Wilson was patrolling the streets when he noticed a vehicle driving erratically through one of the city's seedier neighborhoods. The driver appeared to be under the influence or otherwise impaired, weaving through traffic in a way that posed a danger to other motorists. Officer Wilson initiated a traffic stop, pulling the vehicle over and approaching cautiously. The driver was a Kentucky resident named Aaron Wilkinson, a 39-year-old man traveling with his wife Rachel Palmer and their dog. Aaron was immediately cooperative, freely admitting that he was driving on an expired license and that he was a convicted felon. He explained that he'd been in the area looking for drugs, a confession that would normally have been the most serious thing Officer Wilson would hear that day. But then Officer Wilson searched the vehicle and found a loaded revolver. Aaron was placed in the back of the patrol car, and as he sat there contemplating his situation, he made a decision that would save a woman's life. "I just felt like it was a good time to just get what I knew out in the open," Aaron would later explain. What he revealed to Officer Wilson was shocking beyond anything the officer had encountered in his career. Aaron confessed that he had been hired to commit murder. At the police station, Aaron Wilkinson told investigators a story that sounded like something from a crime thriller. He explained that he had met a man named Samuel Yenowine, known as Sammy, while both men were serving time in prison. Aaron had been incarcerated for forgery, while Sammy was serving time for killing a man in what he claimed was self-defense, then setting fire to his own home. The 2 men had remained friends after their release from prison. Recently, Sammy had contacted Aaron and invited him on what Aaron initially believed was a road trip to Charleston to buy drugs. Aaron, who insisted he was just not violent, had agreed to go along. Only after they were on the road did Sammy reveal the true purpose of the trip. They had been hired to kill someone. Aaron told detectives that despite his initial reluctance, he had ultimately agreed to ride along in exchange for a large sum of cash. During the trip, he and Sammy had met with a woman who gave them what they called a hit packet, a manila envelope containing everything they would need to locate and murder their target. The woman who gave them the packet was later identified as Wendy Moore, Sammy's ex-wife. Wendy, who had once worked as an exotic dancer, was now employed as an executive assistant at Bank of America. She was also romantically involved with her boss. Investigators accompanied Aaron to the hotel room where he and his wife Rachel were staying. Just as Aaron had said, the hit packet was there, tucked away among their belongings. When agents opened it and examined the contents, they realized the full horror of what had almost happened. Inside the packet was a detailed dossier on Nancy Latham. It included her age, the make and model of her car, her license plate number, and maps showing how she came and went from her neighborhood. The packet listed which grocery store she shopped at, and even provided detailed instructions on how to access her house undetected. It even gave the killers a way to access her house undetected to commit the crime, remarked Joseph Boykin, a senior special agent with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Among the most chilling items in the packet was a photograph, the last family picture the Lathams had ever taken together, snapped at a Japanese steakhouse. The photo had been torn in half so that only Nancy and her youngest daughter Madison were visible. "It felt like somebody had kicked me in the stomach," Nancy would later say when she saw the mutilated photograph. Essentially saying, "These are the two people that are going to be in the house. Do whatever you have to do." The hit packet came with a deadline. The murder was to be carried out before the upcoming court hearing in the Lathams' divorce case. Aaron explained to investigators that the initial plan had fallen apart when Sammy got into a fight with his girlfriend and had to return to Kentucky unexpectedly. But Aaron feared he knew too much to simply walk away from the job. He had agreed to return to South Carolina alone to carry out the hit, though he was also desperately hoping to find a way out of the predicament. That opportunity had presented itself when Officer Wilson pulled him over. Now fully cooperating with authorities, Aaron agreed to wear a wire and record a conversation with Sammy about the murder plot. During the recorded call, Aaron told Sammy that it was difficult to get Nancy alone, that there were always other people around her. Sammy's response was chilling. Kill anyone who might be with Nancy when Aaron made his move. The recorded conversation provided investigators with crucial evidence, but they needed to act quickly. Nancy Latham's life was in immediate danger, and she didn't even know it. Federal agents rushed to Nancy's home to warn her that she was the target of a murder-for-hire plot. Nancy and her youngest daughter Madison were immediately taken into protective custody and moved to a safe location. For Nancy, the revelation was almost impossible to process. Someone had compiled a detailed file on her daily routines, her movements, her vulnerabilities. Someone had torn a family photograph in half, marking her and Madison as targets. Someone had paid money and given detailed instructions to ensure she would be killed before she could appear in court. From the beginning, Nancy suspected that someone was her estranged husband, Chris. "We've been married for 24 years, she said. "How do you reconcile the idea that this person hired someone to kill you?" But suspicion wasn't enough. Investigators would need to prove Chris Latham's involvement through hard evidence. As federal agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives worked to build their case, Aaron Wilkinson, Samuel Yenowine, and Wendy Moore were all taken into custody. Rachel Palmer, Aaron's wife, was also arrested for her knowledge of the plot. The investigation into Wendy Moore revealed a web of incriminating evidence. Surveillance footage captured her trying to purchase a prepaid phone. She had been recorded on camera at the hotel, where she rented a room for the two would-be hitmen. Traffic cameras and cell phone triangulation data placed her at the exact location where Aaron said they had received the hit packet. Financial records showed that Wendy had wired money to Sammy using a fake name. Most damning of all, investigators discovered that Wendy had used her work computer at Bank of America to search for and print several items that ended up in the hit packet. Handwriting analysis would later confirm that the notes inside the packet had been written in Wendy's hand. When interviewed by Dateline's Keith Morrison, Wendy insisted she was innocent. She claimed she had only been giving Sammy money to purchase a car for their oldest child. The hotel room and prepaid phone, she said, were simply favors for her ex-husband who had fallen on hard times. "I never set anybody up for murder," she insisted. "I never paid anybody money to murder someone." Wendy did admit to having a romantic relationship with Chris Latham, describing him as sweet and kind, a man of faith who meant a lot to her. Chris also confessed to the affair but vehemently denied wanting Nancy dead. While Wendy sat in jail awaiting trial, recorded phone calls captured her and Chris sharing steamy conversations, pledging their undying love to each other. Chris told Wendy, "I can't wait to ravish you," and promised her she would be home soon. What ultimately tied Chris Latham directly to the murder-for-hire plot was digital evidence from his own computer. Investigators discovered that on the day Sammy and Aaron traveled to Charleston to carry out the hit, Chris had conducted searches on his work computer for maps of Nancy's residence. He had then printed those maps from his computer. Those exact same maps were found inside the hit packet given to the hitmen. Even more damning, phone records revealed that Chris had taken a photograph of Nancy's vehicle, and that same photograph was included in the hit packet. That was significant because that was one piece of evidence that came directly from Chris Latham, explained ATF agent Bobby Callahan. That couldn't have originated from any other person. Chris was arrested on August 6, 2013, more than 4 months after Aaron's traffic stop had uncovered the plot. When confronted with the evidence, Chris claimed he had been gathering information for his private investigator as part of the divorce proceedings. He insisted he never saw the hit packet until his arraignment, and that Sam and Aaron Wilkinson did this on their own. Prosecutors, however, believed they knew Chris's true motive. He didn't want to pay alimony if the divorce went through, and eliminating Nancy before the court hearing seemed like a solution. Before the case could go to trial, Samuel Unwind died by suicide in his jail cell. His death meant that Aaron Wilkinson's testimony would carry even more weight for the prosecution, as Sammy could no longer corroborate or contradict Aaron's account. In August 2014, Wendy Moore was found guilty on 4 charges: conspiracy to commit murder for hire, interstate commerce in the commission of murder for hire, solicitation of murder for hire, and possession of a firearm in furtherance of a crime of violence. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in federal prison. Prosecutors depicted Wendy as the orchestrator of the plot, the woman who had put her boyfriend Chris in touch with her ex-husband Sammy, creating the deadly connection that nearly ended Nancy's life. At Wendy's sentencing, Nancy Latham addressed the court with remarkable composure. She noted that witnesses speaking on Wendy's behalf had expressed sorrow for the loss of life experiences with Wendy's family, but pointed out that Wendy had been more than willing to take those same things away from the Latham women. "The fact is, she was willing to kill me, willing to carry this out," Nancy said. She implored Wendy to take ownership of the crime and explain who had come up with the idea and who had taken what steps to carry it out. Chris Latham's trial concluded with a mixed verdict. He was found guilty of 1 count of using interstate commerce for murder for hire and sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. However, the jury couldn't reach a verdict on the other charges against him, including conspiracy to commit murder for hire and illegal firearm possession. Aaron Wilkinson, the man whose traffic stop confession had unraveled the entire plot, pleaded guilty to federal charges and was sentenced to 4 years in prison along with 500 hours of mental health treatment. The night before Aaron was sentenced, Nancy went to the jail to see him. In a remarkable act of grace, she thanked him for saving her life and told him she had been praying for him. "I wish I could do something other than to tell you thank you, but it's just there's nothing else," she said. "I mean, you saved me. You saved my daughters, and I'm so appreciative." 1:57 p.m. February 15, 2026. Wendy Moore was released from federal prison in October 2021 after serving approximately 7 years of her 15-year sentence. Chris Latham was released in January 2022 after serving approximately 8 years of his 10-year sentence. Upon release, Chris was required to serve 3 years of supervised release. He currently lives in Sullivan's Island, South Carolina, and has maintained a low profile since leaving prison. Nancy Latham, who now goes by Nancy Cannon, continues to live in the Charleston area. She survived an ordeal that would have destroyed many people, not just physically but psychologically. The knowledge that her husband of 24 years, the father of her 2 daughters, had compiled a detailed assassination packet complete with maps, photographs, and instructions on how to kill her. That revelation could have consumed her with hatred and bitterness. Instead, Nancy chose forgiveness. She visited the man who had been hired to kill her and thanked him for making the right choice. She testified in court with dignity, seeking justice but not vengeance. And she has spoken publicly about her experience, helping others understand the reality of domestic violence and the dangers that can lurk within failing marriages. The Nancy Latham case remains one of the most disturbing murder-for-hire plots in recent American history, not because of its brutality. Nancy was never physically harmed, but because of what it reveals about how far jealousy, greed, and wounded pride can drive people. Chris Latham was willing to have the mother of his children killed, rather than face the financial consequences of divorce. Wendy Moore was willing to orchestrate Nancy's murder to clear the path for her relationship with Chris. But the case is also a testament to the power of conscience and the unpredictability of human decency. Aaron Wilkinson could have remained silent during that traffic stop. He could have thrown the gun out the window, denied everything, and let the plot proceed. Instead, when sitting in the back of Officer Daniel Wilson's patrol car, he decided to tell the truth, to reveal what he knew, to save a woman he had never met. That single decision, made in a moment of moral clarity by a convicted felon looking for drugs in a seedy Charleston neighborhood, saved Nancy Latham's life and brought 4 conspirators to justice. It proved that sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the most unexpected places, and that redemption is always possible for those brave enough to choose it. Story 4. The morning of July 19, 2015, began with an uneasy silence that settled over the secluded Jupiter Farms home like a suffocating blanket. When Palm Beach County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the property on Mockingbird Trail, responding to a concerned friend's request for a welfare check, they found the back doors of the spacious residence standing open, a detail that immediately set their nerves on edge. The house had been ransacked, furniture overturned, drawers pulled open, their contents spilled across the floors. But it was what they discovered in the bedroom that transformed a welfare check into a homicide investigation. Dr. Ronald Schwartz, a 65-year-old retired gynecologist and multimillionaire, lay motionless on his bedroom floor, his head surrounded by a dark halo of blood that had pooled and dried beneath him. A .40 caliber shell casing rested nearby, a small brass marker of violence. In the kitchen, obedient and heartbreaking in his loyalty, sat Eddie, Schwartz's white German shepherd, positioned exactly on the rug where his owner had trained him to stay. The dog had waited there for days, refusing to abandon his post even as his master lay dead just rooms away. Ronald Schwartz had lived a life that defied simple categorization. Born and raised in Atlanta, he had built a successful career as a gynecologist before relocating to South Florida in 2003, seeking relief from persistent allergies and a change of scenery. By the time he settled into his Jupiter Farms home, he had already retired from active practice, though his wealth continued to grow through savvy investments that would eventually accumulate into an estate worth $52 million. Those who knew Schwartz described him as a man of contradictions. He was exceptionally intelligent, what one friend called giftedly smart, and possessed a creative streak that led him to write film scripts, including a low-budget medical comedy called Smooth Operator that was produced in 1995. He was also extraordinarily generous, known for leaving outsized tips and spontaneously helping strangers. Just days before his death, while standing in a checkout line at Home Depot, Schwartz witnessed a father shopping with his young daughter, struggling to afford all the items in his cart. Without hesitation, Schwartz handed the man $1,000. Yet Schwartz was also politically conservative and deeply paranoid about societal collapse. He kept large amounts of cash openly displayed on tables throughout his home, often in neat stacks that caught the eye of anyone who entered. He had hidden gold in a PVC pipe disguised to look like ordinary plumbing beneath his bathroom sink, a hedge against the anarchy he feared might one day descend upon the nation. In his garage sat a custom-built, 60-foot luxury cruiser he named Blue Diamond, and he maintained a list of friends he would take with him if he ever needed to flee the country. A divorced man with no children, Schwartz sought companionship through online dating services, frequently flying women from around the world to South Florida for romantic weekends. His closest friend, Dr. David Wehrman, a dermatologist in Atlanta, spoke with him several times a week. Schwartz had also recently beaten bladder cancer, a triumph that filled him with renewed excitement about life. He didn't want to die, recalled Kathy Tenenbaum, a friend of more than 30 years, and he was so excited that he beat cancer. Schwartz's path to tragedy began with an act of kindness toward an employee he had come to trust. For more than a decade, he had employed David Lopez, a Guatemalan immigrant who washed his cars, maintained his boats, worked in his yard, and cleaned his home. David was 43 years old and had come to the United States in 2000, leaving behind his family, including a younger brother he would not see for nearly 15 years. Over time, David and Schwartz had developed a friendship that transcended the employer-employee relationship. Schwartz had helped David's mother back in Guatemala, buying her television sets and providing financial support. In 2014, David's younger brother, Saul Ratana Lopez, moved to Florida. The reunion came after years of separation, during which Saul had grown from a boy of 8 or 9 into a man in his late 20s. "We were close, but then we grew apart," David would later say. When Saul arrived in Florida looking for work, David mentioned it to Schwartz, and the doctor, true to his generous nature, agreed to hire him. Saul started at $15 an hour, performing odd jobs around Schwartz's property. The doctor quickly raised his pay to $20 and even gave him a car, a 2008 Mazda. For a time, the arrangement seemed mutually beneficial. Saul drove Schwartz to Atlanta for cancer treatments, allowing the doctor to sleep during the long journey north in his Cadillac Escalade. But beneath the surface, something was going wrong. Schwartz began to suspect that Saul was stealing from him. A ring disappeared from the house, one that Schwartz kept among his collection of valuable items. When confronted, Saul admitted taking the ring, but claimed he had intended to return it. He never did. The breach of trust was irreparable, and in the days before July 18, 2015, Schwartz fired Saul Lopez. How Saul Lopez came to know Marcos Yanes Gutierrez remains unclear, but by the summer of 2015, the two men had become acquainted. Yanes was only 19 years old, a high school dropout who had come to the United States from Cuba in 2007 with his mother and 2 older brothers. His father, a former political prisoner in Cuba, had arrived in Miami 2 years earlier. Yanes' parents described their son as lacking ambition but fundamentally decent. He had worked briefly at the warehouse where his father was employed and, in the summer of 2015, told his parents he was earning money driving for a rideshare service. They had never heard him mention Saul Lopez. On July 17, 2015, Yanes and Lopez drove together to Jupiter in Yanes' black Acura. They spent the night partying with friends. The next day, the two men drove to Mockingbird Trail, parking on the road and walking up the tree-lined driveway to Schwartz's home. What happened next would be recounted by Lopez himself, though the full truth of that afternoon may never be known. After knocking on the front door, Schwartz waved them around to the back of the house. The doctor was immediately angry that Lopez had brought someone he did not know to his home. Words were exchanged between Yanes and Schwartz, sharp and escalating, before the doctor turned and walked quickly through the kitchen toward his bedroom. Lopez followed. In the bedroom, according to Lopez's account, Schwartz grabbed a gun and shot him in the arm. A struggle ensued, two men grappling for control of the weapon. In the chaos, Lopez pulled a Glock 23.40 caliber handgun from his waistband and fired, striking Schwartz in the rib cage. Schwartz collapsed to the bedroom floor, moaning and groaning in pain. Then Yanes entered the room. He picked up Schwartz's gun and shot the doctor in the head. The autopsy conducted by the Palm Beach County Medical Examiner confirmed that Schwartz had been shot twice, once under the right eye and once under the right arm. About 10 minutes later, Yanes emerged carrying a wooden jewelry box, watches, a tin box filled with cash, and several firearms. The two men drove back to their friend's house in Jupiter, where Lopez announced they needed to return to Miami immediately. He rode back with Jonathan Gomez, a friend from Miami who had driven separately to Jupiter the previous day. When deputies arrived at Schwartz's home on the morning of July 19th, they found a crime scene so extensive that technicians would need 2 full days to process it. The house was vast, and the evidence was scattered throughout the property and into hidden areas. Among the items collected were 2 black and silver jewelry boxes. One contained $100,000 in $100 bills. The other held $400 in banded $2 bills, a detail that would later prove significant. Assistant State Attorney Thea McRoberts, a veteran prosecutor with 34 years of experience and more than 100 murder trials under her belt, knew immediately this case was unusual. This was unusual, not what we see in that neighborhood, she would later say. From the beginning, this appeared to be an innocent person victimized, someone not on the radar of high risk. Lead Detective John Chapman, though only 28 years old at the time, was already a seasoned investigator. Born and raised in Palm Beach County, he had begun working for the Sheriff's Department at 19 and became a homicide detective in 2014. The scope of the crime scene struck him immediately. "That is rare," he said of the 2-day processing timeline. "But the house and property are so large, the crime scene was spread throughout the house, and there were so many hidden sites. We wanted to be sure we collected every piece of evidence." One of the first people investigators interviewed was David Lopez. He told deputies he had gone to Schwartz's house the day before the body was discovered to collect $200 the doctor owed him. When he arrived, the money was not where he expected to find it, and the back door was open. He heard the sound of a television but did not enter the house, fearing he might disturb Schwartz. After speaking with David, investigators turned their attention to his brother. On September 16, 2015, detectives located Saul Lopez at a house on Northwest 11th Avenue in Miami that he shared with 4 friends. When officers asked to search his room, they discovered a Nike shoebox filled with cash in a closet. Under the mattress lay a class ring from Emory University, Schwartz's alma mater. At that point, investigators decided to obtain a search warrant for the entire residence. During an initial interview, Lopez admitted to working for Schwartz and stealing a ring from his home. Then he invoked his right to an attorney and stopped talking. When detectives returned with a warrant, they uncovered a trove of evidence: class rings engraved with Schwartz's name and initials, a stack of $2 bills, 2 watches, a set of keys, boxes of ammunition, and 3 handguns, including a Glock .40 caliber that would later be found to bear Lopez's DNA. The following day, police interviewed Lopez's roommates. It was during these conversations that investigators first heard the name Marcos Yanes Gutierrez. Yanes had given the roommates money and a Rolex watch to hold because he was going to Cuba, they said. Merlin Betancourt, another resident of the house, revealed that she had received a call from Yanes in July. He had told her he was headed to Cuba because he did something stupid in Jupiter. That same day, September 17, 2015, Saul Lopez was arrested on charges of burglary and grand theft. He would remain in custody, held without bond, as the investigation continued. As detectives pieced together the events of July 18th, they became increasingly certain that Marcos Yanes Gutierrez had been present during the murder. But Yanes was gone, having fled to Cuba shortly after the crime. His parents confirmed that he had traveled to the island to visit his elderly grandmother in the Cuban province of Sancti Spiritus. In September 2015, Yane's mother, Nereda, and his brother Rydell had traveled to Cuba to try to persuade him to come home. They maintained they did not know he was a suspect in a murder, and during their visit, he had behaved normally. The family learned that Yanes was wanted for murder only when Detective Chapman and Detective Iris Reyes appeared at their Miami home. Police later returned and towed Yanes' black Acura. Detectives notified the U.S. Marshals Service and the FBI, and Interpol issued a red alert. But both Chapman and McRoberts had little hope of ever bringing Yanes to justice. The United States and Cuba have an extradition agreement, but it had not been used since before Fidel Castro seized control of the government in 1959. Then, in January 2016, something unexpected happened. Cuban officials notified the U.S. State Department that, as a result of the red alert, Yanes had been arrested on the island. Even more surprising, the Cuban government offered to work with U.S. prosecutors to bring him to trial, not in Palm Beach County where the crime occurred, but in Havana. Neither McRoberts nor Chapman had ever been to Cuba, and neither spoke Spanish. But when they learned that the Cuban government would cooperate in prosecuting Yanes, they were ready to go. My initial thought was, this is a success story where we can prosecute somebody who cannot hide from us, McRoberts said. It was either this or nothing. In November 2016, the Cuban government offered visas to McRoberts, Chapman, and Chief Assistant State Attorney Brian Fernandez to travel to Havana to discuss the Yanes case with their Cuban counterparts. They arrived in January 2017, and Chapman would later recall the experience as eye-opening. "We were like 3 tourists getting off the plane," he said. "We had no idea where to go, how to pay for things. It was an eye-opener for me. I had been to some island countries before, but seeing Cuba for the first time was like seeing the Grand Canyon. It was impossible to take it in." During their first visit, the American team delivered a PowerPoint presentation outlining what they knew about the crime. Cuban officials had plenty of questions about blood evidence, fingerprints, DNA traces, and the appearance of the murder scene. The Americans were briefed on the Cuban criminal code and court system, and learned that if Yanes were convicted, the maximum sentence he could receive was 20 years because he was under the age of 21 at the time of the crime. The Cubans also delivered a major surprise. Yanes had confessed to a role in the crime. "That was satisfying," McRoberts said. "Geez, we thought we were right on the money on this." A year passed before the Americans heard anything further. Finally, in January 2018, Palm Beach authorities were summoned to Washington to discuss the Yanes case with U.S. and Cuban officials. On February 20th, 2018, McRoberts and Chapman made a second flight to Havana. After 2 days of discussions, the trial began on February 22nd. A panel of 5 judges, dressed in black robes and seated at a long table, presided over the proceedings. 3 were trained jurists, and 2 were laypeople representing the community. Yanes sat in civilian clothes, flanked by guards in olive green uniforms, separated from his attorney. His mother, Nereda, sat in the pews behind a low wooden gate, watching as her son faced judgment for murder committed thousands of miles away. Only 3 witnesses were called. A relative of Yanes declined to speak. A Cuban official testified that Yanes had not indicated a departure date when he arrived in Cuba in 2015. And then there was Chapman, who spent more than 2 hours on the stand. Normally, such a trial would involve dozens of witnesses, each providing specialized testimony. But in Havana, Chapman had to discuss evidence that would ordinarily be presented by medical examiners, fingerprint technicians, and experts in DNA and blood analysis. Using photos of the crime scene, he walked the judges through the state's theory of the case. Story 5. The cold of that January night in Great Falls, Montana, was a living thing. It was a predator that stalked the quiet, snow-dusted streets, its breath fogging the windows of sleeping houses, its teeth sinking into the very bones of the city. On the 600 block of 4th Avenue South, in a modest apartment building that had seen better days, the cold had found a way inside. It slipped through the crack of a window left open a silent, deadly intruder in the dark. Inside apartment number 6, the air was thick with a tension that had nothing and everything to do with the freezing temperatures. It was the familiar, stale atmosphere of secrets and sorrows, a place where dreams went to die and responsibilities were shed like old coats. Misty Marie Cutbirth, a woman whose youth was being etched away by hardship, moved through the cramped space. At 24, her eyes held the weary caution of someone much older, someone who had learned that life's promises were often just pretty lies. She shared the small apartment with her 2 children and a boyfriend who was more of a ghost than a presence, a fleeting shape in the periphery of her troubled world. The night of January 12, 2016, was supposed to be like any other. The rhythm of their lives had a grim, predictable beat. The struggle for money, the fleeting escapes, the gnawing anxiety that was a constant companion. Tonight, however, the rhythm would break. The fragile, flawed order of their world was about to shatter into a million irreparable pieces. In a small, separate room, Misty's youngest, a 10-month-old baby girl, lay in her crib. The room was a sanctuary of sorts, meant to be the quietest place in the chaotic apartment. But the cold had breached its walls. The open window, a small oversight or a forgotten detail in a haze of distraction, had become a gateway for the night's frigid onslaught. The temperature outside hovered just at the freezing point, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, but inside that room, it was a relentless, creeping hypothermia, wrapping its icy fingers around the tiny, helpless child. There was no cry, no sound to alert the adults in the other room. The baby's struggle was a silent one, her small body's warmth slowly, inexorably stolen by the air. Her breath, once a soft, rhythmic puff, grew shallow, then intermittent, then faded into the chilling stillness. It was a neighbor who broke the silence. The reason for their visit is lost to the official record. Perhaps a knock to borrow sugar, perhaps a complaint about noise, or perhaps just a friend checking in. What they found was a scene of rising panic. The details would later become muddled, obscured by fear and conflicting accounts, but one terrible fact cut through the confusion. The baby wasn't moving. A frantic voice, laced with the metallic taste of terror, reached the 911 dispatcher. "We've got a child that's not breathing," the neighbor gasped into the phone. The words, clinical and stark, failed to capture the raw horror of the moment. The dawning realization that something was not just wrong, but irrevocably, catastrophically wrong. Within minutes, the wail of sirens sliced through the frozen night, converging on 4th Avenue South. The flashing red and blue lights painted streaks of urgent color across the building's drab facade, a beacon of emergency in the sleeping neighborhood. Paramedics and police officers stormed the building, their heavy boots thudding on the stairs, their minds bracing for the unknown. When they pushed open the door to the apartment, they were met not with clarity, but with chaos. The air was heavy. The occupants, Misty, her boyfriend, seemed adrift in a sea of confusion and shock. Their stories were a tangled mess, a collection of contradictory statements about who found the baby and how. One officer, veteran of 100 domestic calls, felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. This was a scene where the truth was a hostage. A paramedic pushed past them, heading for the room where the child lay. The moment he stepped across the threshold, the cold hit him like a physical blow. He described it later as freezing cold, an unnatural pocket of winter trapped inside the heated building. His eyes went immediately to the source, the window, open just enough to let the night in. The baby was in her crib, a small, still form under a thin blanket. As the paramedic reached for her, his trained hands, accustomed to assessing life, felt a chill that went far beyond the ambient temperature of the room. He placed a thermometer on her, but it was useless. The digital display remained blank, unable to register a temperature below its starting point of 86 degrees. The child was too cold for the machine to measure. "She's not breathing. No pulse." The words were clipped, professional, but could not hide the grim reality. They began CPR, a desperate, rhythmic pumping against a stillness that felt absolute. They worked on the tiny, unresponsive body as they rushed her out of the apartment, down the stairs, and into the waiting ambulance. The journey to Benefice Health System Hospital was a frantic, lights and sirens race against a clock that had already run out. At the hospital, the emergency room team took over, a flurry of efficient, urgent activity. But they were fighting a battle that was already lost. The baby's surface temperature was measured at a shocking 78 degrees, far below what the human body can endure. Shortly after arrival, a doctor made the official pronouncement. The 10-month-old girl was dead. Back at the apartment, the scene had transitioned from a medical emergency to a criminal investigation. The conflicting stories from Misty and her boyfriend had raised red flags that even the initial shock could not obscure. Great Falls Police Detective Noah Scott arrived to take the lead. He was a methodical, patient man, someone who knew that the quiet details often spoke louder than the panicked voices. He walked through the apartment, his gaze taking in the evidence of a life lived on the edge. The clutter, the lingering smells, the subtle signs of neglect and despair. He spoke with the first responders, noting their observations about the freezing room and the open window. Then his team began a more thorough search. It didn't take them long. Tucked away, but not well hidden, they found meth paraphernalia. It was a grim, common discovery in cases like this, a piece of the puzzle that often explained the inexplicable. Detective Scott ordered the items to be bagged and tested for fingerprints. The results came back with a stark and damning clarity. The only prints on the paraphernalia belonged to Misty Marie Cutbirth. The investigation deepened. The baby's body was sent for an autopsy. The medical examiner's report was both frustrating and revealing. While the examiner couldn't pinpoint the exact, singular cause of death with absolute certainty, the context provided a chilling narrative. Detective Scott, piecing together the evidence from the scene and the hospital, testified that the cause was hypothermia. The baby had frozen to death. But there was another, more insidious finding from the autopsy. The toxicology reports came back with a devastating detail. Tests on the baby's system revealed that she had been exposed to chronic methamphetamine use during the last few weeks of her life. The drug, which had left its mark on the paraphernalia in the apartment, had also left its poison in the body of the innocent child. It painted a picture not of a single tragic accident, but of a sustained environment of danger and neglect. The open window on a freezing night was not an isolated event. It was the final, fatal act in a longer, quieter tragedy. The weight of the evidence pointed squarely at Misty. The case wasn't one of malicious intent. No one believed she had set out to harm her child. Instead, it was a case of profound, drug-fueled negligence. The charge, when it came, reflected this distinction. Months later, in late April 2016, the Cascade County Attorney's Office formally charged Misty Marie Cutbirth not with homicide, but with one count of felony criminal endangerment. The law defined it as a person who knowingly engages in conduct that creates a substantial risk of death or serious bodily injury to another. The charge carried a maximum penalty of 10 years in prison. Misty was arrested and placed in the Cascade County Detention Center. When she first appeared in court, she pleaded not guilty, her voice barely a whisper in the solemn room. The legal process began its slow, grinding journey, a world away from the frantic immediacy of that January night. For 2 years, the case moved through the justice system. For Misty, it was a period of forced sobriety and reflection, a time spent in the harsh, unforgiving light of her actions. Away from the haze of addiction, the full weight of her loss and her culpability began to settle upon her. The details of her life during this period are not in the public record, but the actions she took speak for themselves. According to statements later made by the prosecution, Misty began to engage with the Department of Family Services, not just meeting their requirements, but actively seeking more help than they mandated. She was, by their account, forthright with her treatment providers, confronting the addiction that had cost her everything. In June of 2018, a significant shift occurred. Misty and her lawyers struck a plea deal with the prosecution. She would change her plea from not guilty to nolo contendere, or no contest. It was a nuanced legal maneuver. A no contest plea is not an admission of guilt, but it allows the court to find the defendant guilty and proceed with sentencing. It's often used to avoid admitting fault in a criminal case that could lead to a civil lawsuit, but it also can be part of a plea bargain where the defendant, while unwilling to utter the word guilty, accepts the proposed punishment. As part of the agreement, the prosecution recommended a 10-year deferred sentence, contingent on her acceptance and completion of a rigorous drug treatment court program. It was a path toward rehabilitation, not just punishment. The final chapter of the legal saga unfolded on a Wednesday in August 2018 in the courtroom of Judge Greg Pinsky. The sentencing hearing was a somber affair. Misty Cutbirth stood before the judge, the weight of the last 2 years etched on her face. Both the prosecution and her defense attorney addressed the complexities and difficulties of the case. The prosecution, in a move that spoke to Misty's efforts since her arrest, pointed to her proactive engagement with treatment services as a sign of her commitment to change. Then, Judge Pinsky spoke, and his words were aimed not just at Misty, but at the community and a public hungry for simple answers to a complex tragedy. He began by stressing a crucial point. This case has always been a criminal endangerment case, not a homicide case. He was drawing a firm line, separating the tragic outcome from the legal and moral calculus of intent. He then addressed the sentence, anticipating the inevitable public outcry that a mother whose child had died would not be sent to prison. He explained that his hands were, in many ways, tied by the laws of Montana. The bottom line is that the legislature will not allow this court to send a nonviolent first-time felony offender to prison when lower costs and more effective community supervision options are available, he stated, his voice steady and firm. For those who would want the defendant to go to prison, under our system it simply would not happen. He was making it clear that the sentence was not a sign of mercy alone, but a reflection of a systemic shift toward rehabilitation for certain offenders. He described the path that lay ahead for Misty, not as an easy way out, but as a grueling challenge. He called the drug treatment court one of the most difficult programs in the justice system, a path that would demand more from her than a prison cell ever could. The sentence was handed down, 10 years with the Montana Department of Corrections, with all time suspended. The freedom was conditional. Misty Cutbirth was ordered to enroll in and successfully complete the drug treatment court program. If she failed, if she faltered, the suspended sentence would come crashing down, and she would be sent to prison to serve out her term. Misty walked out of the courtroom not into the bright sunlight of true freedom, but into the long, hard shadow of her new reality. She was a convicted felon, a mother who had lost a child to her own neglect, a recovering addict facing a decade-long sentence hanging over her head. Her daughter was gone forever, a ghost who would walk beside her for the rest of her days. The cold of that January night would never truly leave her. It was now a permanent part of her, a chilling reminder of the fragility of life and the devastating cost of a single, thoughtless act born from a disease she was now fighting to overcome. The story of Misty Marie Cutbirth and her baby girl was not a simple tale of good and evil, but a heartbreaking tragedy woven from threads of poverty, addiction, and a moment of fatal neglect, leaving behind a silence colder and more profound than any winter night. Story 6. The winter chill lingered in the air of Nashville, Tennessee, as February 1997 dawned, casting a gray pall over the bustling city, known for its vibrant music scene and southern hospitality. The streets of Donelson, a quiet suburb east of downtown, hummed with the everyday rhythm of life. Families heading to church, workers grabbing coffee, and young people dreaming of futures yet to unfold. At the Captain D's seafood restaurant on Lebanon Road, the morning shift was just beginning. Steve Hampton, a 25-year-old manager with a warm smile and a steadfast dedication to his job, arrived early as always. He was a father of 3 young children, his life a tapestry of family barbecues, little league games, and quiet evenings with his wife, Deanna. Steve's days were filled with the simple joys of providing for his loved ones, his steady presence an anchor in their world. Joining him that morning was Sarah Jackson, a 16-year-old high school student with a bright future ahead. Sarah was the kind of girl who lit up any room she entered, cheerful, hardworking, and full of teenage dreams. She balanced schoolwork with her part-time job, saving up for college and cherishing time with her family, who adored her infectious laughter and kind heart. Unbeknownst to them, a shadow was approaching. Paul Dennis Reed Jr., a 39-year-old man from Richland Hills, Texas, had arrived in Nashville years earlier, chasing the elusive dream of country music stardom. Born on November 12, 1957, Reed's early life was marked by instability. His parents divorced when he was young, and he shuttled between his father's home and his grandmother's care. Behavioral issues plagued him from childhood. He stole mail, set fires, and exhibited cruelty toward animals, leading to a stint in a boys' home at age 8. By his teens, he had run away, and his adult life spiraled into crime. In 1983, Reed was convicted of aggravated armed robbery in Houston, serving 7 years of a 20-year sentence before parole in 1990. He moved to Nashville under the alias Justin Parks, hoping to make it as a singer, but reality proved harsher. He worked menial jobs, including as a dishwasher at Shoney's, and lived in a boarding house with a roommate, Brian Fawcett. Financial desperation gnawed at him. He discussed robbing fast food places with co-workers, viewing them as easy targets with cash on hand and few witnesses late at night. On that fateful Sunday morning of February 16th, Reed approached the Captain D's before it opened, feigning interest in a job application. The door was unlocked for the early prep work, and he slipped inside. What followed was a nightmare of calculated violence. Reed confronted Steve and Sarah, forcing them at gunpoint into the restaurant's walk-in cooler. The air inside was frigid, the hum of the refrigeration unit the only sound breaking the tense silence. He ordered them to lie face down on the cold floor, their hearts pounding with terror. Without mercy, Reed shot Steve twice in the back of the head, and once in the back, the reports echoing like thunder in the confined space. Sarah, trembling in fear, suffered 4 shots to the back of her head and 1 to her back. The wounds were execution style, inflicted at close range with a .32 caliber revolver. Blood pooled on the tile, the metallic scent mixing with the chill. Reed then rifled through the cash registers, pocketing over $7,000, including $250 in coins, and fled, leaving the bodies to be discovered later by horrified co-workers. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Deanna Hampton, Steve's wife, received the devastating call, her world shattering as she thought of their children now fatherless. Sarah's family grappled with unimaginable grief, her absence a void in their daily lives. Nashville, a city of melodies and dreams, was suddenly gripped by fear. Police arrived at the scene, cordoning off the restaurant with yellow tape that fluttered in the breeze. Detectives noted the precision of the killings. No signs of struggle outside the cooler, the cash drawers emptied methodically. Shoe prints were collected, blood spatter analyzed, but the killer had taken the surveillance tape, leaving few clues. Metro Nashville Police Department's homicide unit, led by seasoned detectives like Pat Postiglione, began piecing together the puzzle. Postiglione, a veteran with a keen eye for detail, remarked later on the rarity of such a crime. "It's a robbery homicide where you have 2 victims and the bad guy comes in and kills 2 people and puts them in the cooler. That is very unusual. You really don't have that type of crime happen on a regular basis." As the investigation unfolded, Reed blended back into anonymity. He used the stolen cash wisely, making a $2,000 down payment on a new car 2 days later, paying off debts, and spending lavishly despite his unemployment. Witnesses recalled seeing a man matching his description, a tall, lanky figure with a distinctive gait, inquiring about a job the night before the murders. Michael Butterworth and Jason Carter, who were at the restaurant, identified him later. But without immediate leads, the case simmered, the public uneasy as whispers of a targeted killer spread. 5 weeks later, on March 23rd, the nightmare escalated. The McDonald's on Lebanon Road in Hermitage, just 3.4 miles from the Captain D's, was closing for the night. The evening had been routine for the staff. Andrea Brown, a 17-year-old with a passion for music and a close-knit family. Ronald Santiago, 27, a dedicated worker supporting his loved ones. Robert Sewell Jr., 23, known for his easygoing nature, and Jose Antonio Ramirez Gonzalez, a resilient immigrant building a new life. As they exited through the rear door, Reed emerged from the shadows, gun in hand, forcing them back inside. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the tiled floor. Reed herded them into the storeroom, his voice calm but commanding. He ordered them to the ground, their breaths quickening in terror. What followed was a frenzy of violence. Reed shot Andrea, Ronald, and Robert execution style in the storeroom, the gunshots piercing the night. Andrea dreamed of a future in the arts. Ronald's family remembered his quiet strength. Robert's loved ones mourned his untapped potential. Turning to Jose, Reed attempted to fire, but the weapon jammed, a momentary glitch that saved a life. Seizing the opportunity, Jose fought back, but Reed overpowered him, stabbing him 17 times with a knife. The pain was excruciating, blood soaking his clothes, but Jose played dead, lying still as Reed looted $3,000 from the registers and fled. Once sure the assailant was gone, Jose crawled to a phone, dialing 911 with trembling hands. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, where he survived against all odds, his testimony later becoming a cornerstone of the prosecution. The community reeled. 3 more lives lost, a survivor scarred forever. Jose's family rallied around him, grateful for his life but haunted by the trauma. Detectives linked the crimes, the similar modus operandi of targeting closing shifts, the execution-style killings, the robbery motive. TBI agent Mike Breedlove joined the effort, emphasizing forensic evidence. Paul Dennis Reed learned about crime scenes and committing crimes while in prison in Texas. But he didn't understand that there is microscopic evidence that he left behind, and that is what we looked for. Shoe prints, fibers, and blood spatter were scrutinized. Reed's name surfaced when witnesses described a vehicle similar to his 1988 Ford Escort station wagon near the scenes. Yet Reed continued his double life, working sporadically and plotting his next move. On April 23rd, the pattern struck again, this time in Clarksville, 40 miles northwest of Nashville. At the Baskin-Robbins on Wilma Rudolph Boulevard, Angela Holmes, 21, and Michelle Mace, 16, were closing up. Angela was a young mother, her life centered on her child and dreams of stability. Michelle, a high school student, was full of youthful energy, her brother Craig waiting in the parking lot to pick her up. Reed knocked on the door after closing, persuading them to let him in, perhaps with a story or charm. Once inside, he kidnapped them at gunpoint, forcing them into his car. The drive to Dunbar Cave State Park was tense, the night dark and foreboding. At the park, Reed bound their hands and led them into the woods. There, he slashed their throats with a large knife, the wounds deep and savage. Angela's neck lacerated to the backbone, transecting arteries. Michelle suffering 14 stab wounds, her vertebral column cut multiple times in a sawing motion. Both remained conscious for agonizing minutes, bleeding out in the cold darkness. Their bodies were discovered the next day by a dog walker, the scene a horror of blood and brutality. Reed stole $1,565 from the store, his car later yielding forensic evidence. Blood on his shoes matching Angela's DNA, fibers from the victims on his car interior. Craig Mace, waiting in vain, entered the store and called emergency services, his worry turning to devastation. The families were shattered, Angela's child left motherless, Michelle's siblings and parents grappling with loss. The murders, now 7 in 67 days, terrorized Middle Tennessee. Fast food workers eyed customers warily. Communities held vigils, the air thick with grief and fear. The breakthrough came on June 1st, when Reed, fired from Shoney's, confronted his former manager, Mitchell Roberts, at his home. Begging for his job back, Reed turned violent, threatening with a gun and attempting to handcuff Roberts for abduction. Roberts resisted, retreating inside and claiming he had a weapon. Reed fled, but Roberts alerted police. When Reed called to apologize, Roberts lured him back, where special units arrested him on June 25th. Evidence mounted swiftly. Reed's car contained a large knife consistent with the Baskin-Robbins wounds. A Texaco credit card receipt placed him in Clarksville at 9:45 p.m. on April 23rd. Blood on his Nike shoes matched Angela Holmes, and fibers linked the victims to his vehicle. Witnesses identified him. His post-crime spending contradicted his poverty. Jose Gonzalez positively identified him as the attacker. Reed's trials began in 1999, separated by county. Davidson for Captain D's and McDonald's, Montgomery for Baskin-Robbins. Jurors from outside areas were sequestered due to media frenzy. In the Captain D's trial, fingerprints on Steve Hampton's cards, found near Reed's home, were damning. For McDonald's, Jose's testimony was pivotal. In Clarksville, forensic links sealed the case. Defense argued mental incompetence. Reed suffered delusions of government surveillance, scientific technology controlling his mind. Experts diagnosed schizophrenia, anosognosia, and brain damage from injuries like a 1971 skull fracture. But state experts found him competent, citing malingering. Reed claimed innocence, calling his team actors. Juries convicted him on all counts, imposing 7 death sentences, the most in Tennessee history, based on aggravating factors: prior violent felony, murders to avoid arrest, heinous nature involving torture. Appeals dragged on. Reed waived some, desiring death, but family and advocates challenged his competency. Stays came, including one in 2003 hours before execution, and in 2007 over lethal injection concerns. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld injection in 2008. In 2013, the Tennessee Supreme Court ruled against post-conviction relief, finding no clear incompetence. But execution never came. On November 1, 2013, Reed died in prison at 55 from natural causes: pneumonia, heart failure. Families found mixed closure, justice served, but lives irreparably broken. Nashville healed slowly, the scars a reminder of vulnerability. Nashville in the 1970s was a perfect storm for serial killers. Transient populations, a booming music industry, and lax law enforcement in some areas created opportunities. Steve's children grew without a father. Sarah's family cherished memories. Jose built a family in Atlanta, staying connected to Postiglione. Angela and Michelle's loved ones held vigils at Dunbar Cave. Reed's story, a cautionary tale of unchecked darkness, echoed in the city's resilient spirit. Story 7. The night of May 30th, 2010, was warm in Bedfordview, a leafy suburb east of Johannesburg, South Africa, where the hum of city life softened into the quiet of residential streets. Natasha Viljoen, a 44-year-old mother, stood in the glow of her kitchen, her newborn son cradled in her arms. 5 days earlier, she had given birth to him, a moment she celebrated on social media with a radiant post about new beginnings. Her partner, a man whose name would later fade into the background of her story, was by her side, their small apartment filled with the soft chaos of a new baby. Natasha, with her warm smile and knack for connecting with people, seemed ready to embrace this chapter of her life. But as the clock ticked past midnight, something shifted. By morning, Natasha was gone, leaving behind her infant, her 10-year-old daughter from a previous relationship, and a trail of questions that would haunt her family for years. The official narrative suggested she had walked away, but those who knew her, her sister, her daughter, her friends, refused to believe it. Thus began a mystery that would linger unresolved, a wound that refused to heal in the heart of a community. Natasha Viljoen was born in 1966, in a South Africa still gripped by the tensions of apartheid. Growing up in a working-class family, she learned early to navigate life with resilience and warmth. By her early 40s, she had built a life that, while not without its struggles, was marked by love and determination. She was a mother first, fiercely devoted to her daughter, a bright girl who adored her. Natasha worked as a receptionist, her friendly demeanor making her a favorite among colleagues and clients. Her life wasn't glamorous, but it was hers, rooted in the everyday joys of family, the pride of raising her children, and the hope of a fresh start with her newborn son. Bedford View, with its tree-lined avenues and proximity to Johannesburg's bustling center, offered a sense of stability, a place where Natasha could dream of a future for her children. On May 25, 2010, Natasha gave birth to her son at a local hospital. The delivery was uneventful, and she returned home to her apartment, a modest space filled with baby clothes and the scent of talcum powder. Her social media posts from that week were filled with joy, photos of her son's tiny hands and captions about the miracle of new life. Friends later recalled her excitement, the way she spoke of her plans to build a home with her partner, a man she had been with for a few years. But there were undercurrents of strain. Natasha's sister, Michelle, would later tell investigators that Natasha had been navigating a complex relationship, one marked by occasional arguments but no overt signs of danger. The couple's apartment was small, their finances tight, and the demands of a newborn added pressure. Still, Natasha seemed to rise to the challenge, her strength a quiet force. The night she disappeared began like any other. Natasha fed her son, changed his diaper, and settled him into his crib. Her daughter was staying with relatives, a common arrangement to give Natasha space to recover from childbirth. Her partner, whose identity remained private in police reports, later told authorities they had gone to bed around 10 p.m. He claimed he woke in the early hours to find Natasha gone, her phone, keys, and purse still on the kitchen counter. The front door was unlocked, a detail that would later spark debate. Had she stepped out for air and been taken? Or had she left intentionally, as the police initially suggested? The apartment showed no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no overturned furniture. Yet, to those who knew Natasha, the idea that she would abandon her newborn and daughter was unthinkable. By morning, her partner contacted Michelle, who rushed to the apartment. The sight of Natasha's belongings, her phone, her wallet, the half-empty bottle of formula, sent a chill through her. Michelle called the Bedford View police, who arrived within hours. The officers, led by a seasoned detective named Siphon Kosi, took statements and surveyed the scene. Their initial assessment leaned toward a voluntary disappearance. Natasha, they noted, had faced stress as a new mother, and postpartum depression was floated as a possible factor. But Michelle pushed back, her voice sharp with conviction. Natasha would never leave her children, she told Nkosi, her hands trembling as she held her sister's phone. Something's wrong. You need to look harder. The police opened a missing persons case, but resources were limited. Bedford View, while safer than some parts of Johannesburg, was not immune to crime, and the station was stretched thin. Flyers went up around the suburb, Natasha's smiling face staring out from telephone poles and shop windows. The missing poster, later shared widely online, described her as 44 years old, medium build, with dark hair and a warm smile. The community rallied, organizing searches through nearby parks and alleyways. Volunteers combed the streets, calling Natasha's name, while her sister and friends posted pleas on social media. Days turned to weeks, and the trail grew cold. The police interviewed Natasha's partner, neighbors, and co-workers, but no one reported anything unusual. A neighbor recalled hearing a car idling outside the apartment complex around 2 a.m. on May 31st, but the detail was vague, the vehicle untraceable. Natasha's phone records showed no calls or texts after 9 p.m. that night, and her bank accounts remained untouched. The lack of evidence fueled speculation. Some suggested she had left to escape a strained relationship, but Michelle dismissed this, pointing to Natasha's devotion to her children. Others whispered of foul play, noting Johannesburg's high crime rates. Kidnappings, though rare, were not unheard of. The police, however, lacked the manpower for a deeper investigation, and the case slipped into the limbo of unsolved mysteries. Michelle refused to let it rest. A single mother herself, she took custody of Natasha's daughter and vowed to find answers. She reached out to private investigators, draining her savings to fund their work. One investigator, a former police officer named Peter Botha, uncovered a lead in late 2010. A woman matching Natasha's description had been seen at a bus station in Johannesburg's Central District, a chaotic hub known for its transient population. The sighting was unconfirmed, and security footage was too grainy to be conclusive. Botha also explored rumors of a local crime syndicate, known for targeting vulnerable women, but the trail led nowhere. Each dead end deepened Michelle's frustration, her grief a constant ache. Natasha's daughter, now 10, struggled to understand her mother's absence. She would sit in her room, clutching a photo of Natasha, asking why her mother hadn't come home. Michelle, torn between shielding the girl and seeking the truth, began to suspect foul play. She contacted the media, and local outlets like Times Live picked up the story, amplifying the call for information. The True Crime South Africa podcast, hosted by Nicole Engelbrecht, brought renewed attention in 2021, detailing the case's emotional toll. Engelbrecht noted the family's belief that Natasha had been taken, possibly by someone she knew. For those who loved her, the idea that she walked away didn't seem plausible, Engelbrecht said, her voice heavy with empathy. In 2012, a breakthrough seemed imminent. A tip came through the Community Intervention Center, a 24-hour trauma helpline, suggesting Natasha had been spotted in Pretoria, 50 kilometers north of Johannesburg. The caller claimed to have seen a woman resembling Natasha working at a market stall, but when police followed up, the woman was gone. The lead fizzled, but it reignited Michelle's hope. She began traveling to Pretoria on weekends, posting flyers and questioning vendors. Her persistence drew attention from advocacy groups, who saw Natasha's case as part of a larger issue. South Africa's epidemic of missing persons, particularly women and children. The country's high crime rates, over 45,000 reported cases of violent crime in 2010 alone, made it easy for people to vanish without a trace. Years passed, and the case grew colder. Natasha's son, raised by Michelle, began to ask about his mother, his questions a painful echo of his sister's. Michelle kept Natasha's memory alive, sharing stories of her laughter, her love for music, her dreams of opening a small bakery. But the absence was a shadow over their lives. In 2015, a Facebook page, SA Community Crime Watch, posted about Natasha's case, labeling it a cold case and urging people to share her missing poster. The post garnered thousands of shares, but no new leads emerged. The community's support was heartfelt, but the lack of answers was crushing. Michelle began to fear that Natasha's fate would remain a mystery, like so many others in South Africa. In 2018, a new detective, Lerato Makona, took an interest in the case. Makona, known for her tenacity, reviewed the original files and interviewed Natasha's partner again. His story hadn't changed, but Makona noted inconsistencies, small details about the night Natasha disappeared that didn't align. She requested forensic analysis of Natasha's phone, but the technology available in 2010 was limited, and the data yielded nothing new. Makona also explored the possibility of human trafficking, a growing concern in Johannesburg. She contacted organizations like the International Organization for Migration, which reported that South Africa was a hub for trafficking networks. Yet, without concrete evidence linking Natasha to such a network, the theory remained speculative. The emotional toll on Natasha's family was profound. Her daughter, now a teenager, struggled with anger and grief, her trust in the world shaken. Michelle, juggling work and parenting, felt the weight of being both mother and aunt. She attended support groups for families of missing persons, finding solace in shared stories but no resolution. This enduring pain, noting that Natasha's sister and daughter were still on a journey to find the truth 11 years after her disappearance. The podcast's coverage sparked a flurry of online discussion, with some listeners speculating about domestic violence or a targeted abduction, but no evidence substantiated these theories. By 2025, Natasha's case remained unsolved, a stark reminder of the challenges facing South Africa's justice system. The Bedfordview Police, under pressure from advocacy groups, reopened the case periodically, but each review ended in frustration. Michelle continued her fight, now joined by Natasha's daughter, who had grown into a young woman determined to honor her mother's memory. They organized vigils, lighting candles in Bedfordview's community center, where friends and strangers gathered to share stories of Natasha's kindness. The Facebook page dedicated to her case grew to thousands of followers, a digital testament to a life unfinished. The mystery of Natasha Viljoen's disappearance carried a broader significance. It reflected the struggles of countless families in South Africa, where missing persons cases often languished due to limited resources and systemic issues. For Michelle, the fight was personal, a refusal to let her sister become a statistic. She carried Natasha's photo, a snapshot from a happier time, and spoke of her in the present tense, as if she might still walk through the door. The streets of Bedfordview remained quiet, their secrets buried deep. Natasha's apartment, now occupied by new tenants, held no clues. Her phone and purse, stored in a police evidence locker, were relics of a life interrupted. The community that once searched for her had moved on, but for those who loved her, the questions lingered. Had Natasha been taken by someone she trusted? Was she a victim of Johannesburg's underbelly, a city where crime could swallow a person whole? Or had she, against all odds, chosen to disappear, leaving her children to preserve some hidden truth? The answers, like Natasha herself, were out of reach, lost in the shadows of a night that refused to give up its truth.